Good evening, visitors, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Gerard Pratt, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Corporal Myola Lynch. This evening, we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the loss of the Australian light cruiser, HMAS Perth, and more than 350 members of her crew in the Battle of Sunda Strait on this date in 1942. The bell that you just heard being struck was recovered in 1975 from the wreckage of HMAS Perth 1. On the 28th of February, HMAS Perth and the heavy cruiser USS Houston were making for the southern coast of Java. Late that evening, they encountered the Japanese Western Invasion convoy at the northern entrance to the Sunda Strait. The convoy was escorted by a large Japanese flotilla of 2 light cruisers, 8 destroyers and a mine layer, supported by another 4 cruisers, an aircraft carrier and further destroyers. Heavily outnumbered, soon running low on ammunition and changing course constantly to avoid attacks from every direction, the Australian and American crews fought desperately against impossible odds. Together, Perth and Houston succeeded in sinking a Japanese transport and a mine layer and severely damaging a further 3 transports. But under the weight of Japanese numbers and superior firepower, the end was inevitable. Japanese ships launched 85 torpedoes during the brief engagement. Perth suffered her first hit from a Japanese shell at 11:26 p.m. Soon after midnight, the first torpedo struck. With her crew reduced to firing practice shells and illumination star shells, a second torpedo hit Perth shortly afterwards, and her captain ordered, "Abandon ship." Perth was hit by 2 more torpedoes before finally sinking at 25 minutes after midnight on the 1st of March. The action was all over in just under an hour from the time the first round struck. Houston, meanwhile, continued to fight, although ablaze from enemy fire. She was rent by shell and torpedo explosions and sank just 20 minutes later. The captains of both vessels perished with their ships. Of the complement of 686 men in HMAS Perth, over 350 officers and ratings perished in this, her last action. Of the 320 survivors captured by the Japanese, 1/3 died during their ordeal as prisoners of war. Of the more than 1,000 American officers and men in USS Houston, less than 400 escaped their sinking ship. Only 266 of them survived the harsh regime of brutality and starvation in Japanese prisoner of war camps. Australian sailors would undoubtedly wish us to also remember their brave American comrades today. Together, we remember the sailors of both vessels, as well as those of the other Allied warships, Australian, British, American and Dutch sailors who were lost in the series of engagements in the Java Sea while attempting to repel large Japanese invasion forces. We're honoured to welcome Captain Christopher Leese, former Executive Officer of HMAS Perth 3, representing the Chief of Navy. Captain Tobias Reed, United States Navy Coast Guard Attaché, Embassy of the United States of America. Mrs. Jan Chataway, widow of able seaman Frank Chataway, HMAS Perth 1 survivor and subsequent prisoner of war. We also warmly welcome Mr. Peter Everly, President of the HMAS Perth National Association, and Mr. Alec McGowan, President of the Naval Association of Australia, ACT section. Mr. John King, President of the Returned and Services League of Australia, ACT branch, and all association members who have joined us this evening to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the loss of HMAS Perth 1. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those who are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony from across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students from Victoria on behalf of St Margaret's Primary School, Maribyrnong. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one.
If able, and students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through until the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to electrical artificer, second class Henry Charles Bryce Porter. Henry Porter was born on the 31st of May 1900 in Newcastle, New South Wales, the son of Joseph and Maud Porter. Little is known of his early life. At some point in time, he moved to Sydney, where on the 13th of October 1923, Henry married Margaret Talley in the suburb of Annandale. Margaret had been born in West Ham in East London, immigrating to Australia as a child. A daughter, Enid, was born to the couple 7 years later. Porter was a member of the Royal Australian Naval Reserve, and with the advent of the Second World War was mobilised, first reporting for duty on the 19th of February 1940. He was initially involved in training at HMAS Penguin and HMAS Cerberus. As an electrical artificer, second class, he was tasked with the electrical maintenance of the ship's machinery, such as engines and generators, as well as the installation and maintenance of ship's electrical systems. In June 1940, Porter joined HMAS Perth, one of 3 modified Leander-class light cruisers used by the Royal Australian Navy during the early part of the Second World War. Initially patrolling the Western Atlantic and the Caribbean in search of German shipping and escorting convoys, Perth was later transferred to the Mediterranean Fleet and helped to escort convoys to Malta, as well as playing a role in the Battle of Cape Matapan. Porter was a keen photographer, and during his service took photographs of shells exploding in the water and smoke screens around the ships during the Battle of Matapan. Perth escorted convoys to Greece and Crete and helped to evacuate Allied troops. The ship was badly damaged by Axis aircraft during the evacuation of Crete, and Porter also captured these events. Today, his photographs, including a formal group portrait of the crew of the ship, are part of the National Collection at the Australian War Memorial. After Perth returned to Australia for permanent repairs, Captain Hector Waller assumed command. Early in 1942, Perth sailed from Sydney, joining an escort for a convoy of 4 oil tankers and 2 cargo vessels on a mission to claim oil from the Dutch East Indies before the Japanese could invade. The Japanese invasion was as swift as it was effective. 2 weeks after the fall of Singapore, Perth and the heavy cruiser USS Houston were making their way along the coast of Java. They were the only large Allied ships to have survived the Battle of the Java Sea the day before, after which they retreated and attempted to resupply, having been ordered to sail for Cilacap via the Sunda Strait. On the evening of the 28th of February, they encountered the Japanese Western invasion convoy at the northern entrance to the Sunda Strait, escorted by a large Japanese flotilla of 2 light cruisers, 8 destroyers, and a mine layer, and supported by another 4 cruisers, an aircraft carrier, and further destroyers. Heavily outnumbered, running low on ammunition and changing course constantly to avoid attacks from every direction, the Australian and American crews fought against impossible odds. Together, they sank a Japanese transport and minesweeper, then severely damaged a further 3 transports. But given the weight of numbers and superior firepower of the Japanese force, the result was inevitable. Perth suffered her first hit from a Japanese shell at 11:26 p.m. Half an hour later, Captain Heck Waller ordered his ship to try to force a way through. But with her crew reduced to firing practice shells and illumination star shells, Captain Waller was forced to give the order to abandon ship. Perth was hit by 2 more torpedoes before sinking shortly after midnight. USS Houston continued to fight on, sinking 20 minutes later. Perth lost 350 officers and men, including her commander, Captain Hector Waller, DSO, an electrical artificer, second class Henry Charles Bryce Porter, who was 41 years old. With no grave but the sea, today he is commemorated at Plymouth Naval Memorial in England. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, amongst almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of his name is listed on the Plymouth Naval Memorial, is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember electrical artificer, second class, Henry Charles Bryce Porter, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
Catapult party, shoulder, arms.
They have no grave but the cruel sea. No flowers lay at their head. A rusting hulk is their tombstone, a fast on the ocean bed. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Catapult party, present, arms.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catapult party in words. Turn. Catapult party quick. March.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozieres, or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director and staff, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorial's development project. We particularly appreciate your visit despite the challenges posed by COVID, and we wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.